Hello, my name is Clara, and for 20 years, I lived in the shadow of a grand name and an even grander house. To the world, and especially to my late husband's family, I was the quiet, lucky girl who had married into a legacy. I was the trophy wife who had transitioned into a useful fixture. They looked at my modest background and my silent demeanor and assumed I was a passenger in my own life, a penniless guest in a house that belonged to the great lineage of my husband's ancestors. When my husband passed away 3 months ago, the vultures didn't even wait for the grass to grow over his grave. Today was the day they decided to swoop in for the kill. The afternoon was gray and biting when the black sedan pulled up the long gravel driveway of the estate. My late husband's sister, Beatrice, stepped out first, followed by her husband and their 24-year-old son, Julian. Trailing behind them was a man in a sharp gray suit, clutching a leather briefcase, their lawyer. I stood on the stone veranda, wearing a simple black sweater and holding a cup of tea. I didn't greet them with a smile. I didn't need to. Beatrice didn't bother with pleasantries. She walked up the steps, her heels clicking aggressively against the limestone. She looked at the towering oak doors and the sprawling gardens as if she were already measuring for new curtains. "Clara," she said, her voice dripping with a forced, icy pity. "We've given you 90 days. We felt that was more than generous, considering you have no blood relation to this estate. Julian needs to move in by the 1st of the month. He's starting his new position in the city, and this house is, after all, the crown jewel of our family history. It's time you moved back to wherever it was you came from." Her son, Julian, smirked, leaning against a stone pillar. "It's nothing personal, Aunt Clara, but a house like this needs a real heir, not a temporary resident." They followed me into the grand library, a room filled with thousands of books and a fireplace large enough to stand in. The lawyer sat at the heavy mahogany desk, spreading out several documents. "Mrs. Vance," the lawyer began, clearing his throat, "the family has reviewed the will. While your late husband left you his personal effects, the estate itself is a matter of ancestral heritage. My clients are the rightful successors to the family name and, by extension, this property. We have the eviction notice prepared. You have 78 hours to vacate." Beatrice leaned back in a leather armchair, looking around the room with a sense of ownership. "You've lived high on the hog for 20 years, Clara. You've enjoyed the prestige, the staff, and the view. But let's be honest, you never brought a cent to this marriage. You were a poor relation who got lucky. Now the luck has run out." I took a slow sip of my tea. I let the silence stretch until Beatrice began to fidget. "Is that all?" I asked quietly. "Is that all?" Beatrice shrieked. "You're being kicked out of one of the finest estates in the country. You should be begging for a smaller apartment or a stipend." I set my teacup down on a coaster. I didn't look at the lawyer's eviction notice. Instead, I reached into the desk drawer and pulled out a thick, blue folder. "Beatrice," I said, my voice steady and cold, "you speak a lot about family legacy and ancestral wealth, but you were always too busy spending your allowance to actually look at the books. Your brother, my late husband, was a brilliant man in many ways, but he was a disastrous businessman. He had a gambling habit that made the stock market look like a Sunday school picnic. I slid a document across the table. It was a summary of debt. By 10 years ago, this house was mortgaged to the hilt. By 7 years ago, the bank was weeks away from seizing it. The Vance legacy was a hollow shell. My husband was, quite literally, POR as you like to say, long before he died. The lawyer frowned, leaning in to look at the numbers. Beatrice's face turned a mottled red. That's a lie. This house has been in the family for 4 generations. It was, I agreed, until 5 years ago, when the bank put it up for a private, quiet sale to satisfy the debts. A holding company based in the Cayman Islands purchased the deed in its entirety. They paid off the back taxes, the hidden liens, and the astronomical maintenance costs. I slid a second paper across. That holding company is a private entity. I am the sole owner of that company. I used the earnings from the investment firm I started secretly a decade ago, the one your brother thought was just a little hobby to buy this house. I didn't buy it for him. I bought it from the bank to keep a roof over our heads because he was too proud to tell you he had lost everything. The room went so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel. The lawyer's face paled as he realized the documents I held were far more powerful than his. "This house isn't family property, Beatrice," I said, standing up. "It hasn't been for a long time. It is my private property. My late husband lived here for the last 5 years as a guest of my corporation. And as for you," I turned to look at her husband and Julian. "You 3 have lived in the guest wing for the last 3 years, rent-free, claiming you were between homes. You've used the staff, eaten the food, and driven the cars all on my tab. I allowed it because I didn't want the scandal while my husband was ill. But the guest period is over." I pulled out a final set of papers. These are invoices. Market rate rent for the guest wing over 36 months, plus utility shares and service fees. It totals nearly $400,000. I expect payment within 30 days, or my legal team will move to freeze your personal accounts. Beatrice stood up, her hands shaking. You're a monster. You lured us into a trap." "No," I replied, walking toward the door. "I simply stopped pretending to be the person you wanted me to be. I am the owner of this estate. You are the poor relations now." I signaled to the staff who were waiting in the hall. 2 sturdy men began carrying suitcases out of the guest wing and toward the front gate. "Your things are already packed," I said, leading them back to the veranda. "I've taken the liberty of putting Julian's designer sneakers and your vintage trunks in the driveway. The gate code will be changed in 10 minutes." Julian looked at the pile of luggage in the gravel, his smugness replaced by sheer terror. Beatrice tried to scream, to curse, to invoke the family name one last time, but the lawyer was already pulling her toward the car, whispering urgently about legal standing and losing the case. As the black sedan sped away, kicking up dust on the driveway I had paid for, I stood on the steps of my home. I looked at the vast gardens and the gray sky, feeling the weight of 20 years of silence finally lifting. They thought I was a guest in their history. They didn't realize I had bought the future while they were busy living in a past that didn't exist anymore. I walked back inside and closed the heavy oak doors, and for the first time in my life, the house felt truly, beautifully quiet.